Hello, this is Tempo Afric TV's Beyond the Headline Show, and I'm your host, Petros Haile. Today, our guest is JESSIE MONGRUE0. JESSIE MONGRUE0 is from Liberia. He's a historian and an author of one book and one on the way. And the first book is, well, he's also working for his doctorate degree at St. Thomas University in Minnesota. The first book is Liberia, America's Footprint in Africa. And the one that's supposed to come out sometimes in June or July is What's Wrong in Africa.
What's working?
What's working in Africa, I'm sorry, thank you. And the role of civil society and democratic reform and good governance. Okay, thank you. Welcome to our show.
Thank you, Petros.
Yeah.
Again, it's a privilege to always come to discuss these matters that are very permanent to our people and continent.
Thank you, thank you. You're not new for this show. You've been here before some times ago when we started this program. I would say about a year and a half.
Exactly.
Yeah. But actually, we discussed your first book then. Briefly. We will do it again. But just if you can give us some highlights of your previous book.
Well, it was a book that I wrote to inform readers, potential readers, educators, organizations, and people who have interest on the history of U.S. and Liberia. So it's a book that depicts the cultural, the social, the political connections between the two countries, Liberia and the U.S. But I also have some components of the book that talks about American foreign policy as it relates to the continent in general. So
Okay.
that's what the book was about.
It was about, okay. Yeah. Again, the book is America's Footprint in Africa.
Exactly.
Then the upcoming one is What's Working in Africa, which is the second book. And you talked about the role of civic society in Africa.
Yeah.
Do you mind elaborating a little bit on that one?
Yeah, and the reason why I decided to write this book on the continent is because, for the most part, especially those who are not Africans, when it comes to the continent, the idea, the general notion has been a place where there's civil war, mismanagement, poverty, just all of the downsides of humanity. And people don't know that there are things happening, there are some positive things happening. So I decided to write this book as a counter argument that yes, there are challenges, but there are also some success stories. And so the book is talking about the role of civil society, because civil society has a lot of tremendous role in what's happening on the continent, and countries that are doing well in the area of democratic reform and good governance.
Oh, okay. It's already evidenced in some parts of Africa.
Yes.
Okay. A lot of people confuse civic society with other interest groups. And, who qualifies to be civic society?
Well, civil society can be any number of
Okay.
organizations. For example, labor movement,
Labor
university, student movement, and the list goes on. There are some non-profit organizations that are also falling within that definition.
Okay.
So it can be a wide range of people who are trying to make good of society's upcoming. So
Yeah.
there's no specific way to define it. You can name it based on what you're doing in the society, in the community, and the people.
Okay, so they don't have a specific political agenda. They just represent their constituents.
I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
I think they try to, given what has transpired on the continent, I think they have an agenda.
Okay.
Their role is the most good civil society will talk about accountability, transparency,
So, yeah.
and holding the state responsible
Okay.
to do the right thing. So they do have an agenda in a much larger way than what we would think of.
Okay, and how, you already mentioned it a little bit, how do this civil society groups or individuals contribute to the good governance and democratic reform?
Well, the countries, that's a good question, by the way. The countries that I've covered, for example, Ghana and West Africa, one of the best in terms of governance and democracy and reform. Countries like Mauritius, Botswana, Seychelles, the Cape Verde Island, Tunisia up there in the north, that has really done tremendously well after the Arab Spring. All of these countries that I've named or researched in my book, in my second book, civil society role was very tremendous. It was important. It was very vital.
Right,
They
okay.
hold the state responsible. They make sure that people are held responsible for what they are doing, not just in anybody, but leaders who are in charge of decision making and public policy. And that's where civil society comes in, to make sure that these things happen because they are important.
Okay.
And so they have played a role in the 21st century Africa's political process and have made it well for a number of these other countries that I talk about. Yes.
Okay, yeah, you mentioned Tunisia and Ghana.
Ghana.
I think that's one of the 10 success stories in Africa.
Yeah.
Tunisia, from that uprising to become relatively stable
Yeah.
country in Africa.
Yeah.
And Ghana has a record of
Yeah.
democratic transition, especially after Rawlings,
Yeah.
Would that be a good example?
Those are what I call success stories on the continent. These countries the leaders have been very selfless in a lot of ways. They are not perfect. There are still issues to be dealt with. But if you look at the courage that the leaders have in Tunisia to make sure that they are an exemplary on the continent, especially in North Africa, and considering Egypt, Libya, Algeria, and some of the other countries in North Africa. Same thing in West Africa. There are still challenges, but you can look at Ghana and see why she can be considered one of the success stories.
Oh,
And if you go to a certain part of the continent,
Yes.
you will see Botswana, you will see Namibia, you will see Seychelles and the Cape Verde Island. These are countries, of course, Cape Verde is on the west coast, so I'm not putting that to the countries on the southeast or the Indian Ocean corridor.
Okay.
But these are countries that have had, the leaders have had the courage to make sure that there is that challenge that we face, governance, democracy, and reform.
Okay.
It's taken to another level. And now I'm making success stories.
Again, if you mention countries like Namibia, I remember from Sam Nwomo era till he gets his independence. On the other hand, the same type of struggle that they were waged, like Eritrea or South Sudan, they're going through the same process, but the
Yeah.
outcome is different.
Yeah, they have had different outcome.
And on Namibia's case, did the civic society also contribute to have this relatively stable government?
Stable,
Yeah.
holding the state and the government and the leaders accountable, making sure that whatever the needs of the people that is at stake is being addressed.
Okay.
And so that's what makes a difference. That's what makes the difference between the countries that are what I call, and I have them in different stages, by the way.
Okay.
I have advanced reform countries, then I have committed countries, then I have those that are what we call hesitant.
Okay.
They're not quite there, but they're not bad. Then of course you still have some that are still in the category or the range of authoritarian regime. For example, Zimbabwe
Yeah, okay.
will be one of
Good.
those countries. Sudan is another one. Not South Sudan, but Sudan.
Yeah,
as we know it to be.
the northern parts
Okay,
of
yeah,
Sudan.
sure.
Well, you know, and Sudan, I passed through Sudan when I was younger.
Okay.
And Sudan, even from way back,
Uh-huh.
there's a certain amount of liberty. Like people
Mhm.
can talk about their differences,
Mhm.
from the Communist Party to Muslim brothers.
Mhm.
You find them exercising their right,
Mhm.
but actual implementation is not there. Yeah,
That is a
that
concern.
institution that
Mhm.
brings them to power,
Mhm.
it's cut.
Mhm.
But I'm glad you mentioned those countries, because we can go country by country,
I know.
and yeah, because some of them seems to have similar experience
They do.
but different outcomes.
Different outcome
Yeah,
depending
yeah.
on who's in charge,
Yeah.
who's making the decision.
Okay. Just to go to a little different topic, the foreign policy issues in Africa.
Yeah, at the end of the 20th century, when we all saw European colonizers, talking about those who really, the countries that in Europe that colonized the continent. You talk about France, Great Britain,
Yep.
Belgium, Congo, and the list goes on. There is a new trend at the end of the Cold War, and it seems to me, from our research, that foreign policy dynamic is being faced with China and the U.S.
Okay.
Those are what I'm referring to when I say new trend or foreign
Okay.
policy corridor.
Okay.
For Chinese, of course, they're coming in a lot of different ways. You see Chinese in almost nearly every country on the continent. So are the U.S. It's the U.S. as well. They've also have had vested interest in a number of different spots, strategic spots on the continent. So those are the new two friends that I think, or that are now moving the agenda on the foreign policy question on the continent right now.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Since there's only two of them. Europeans, to an extent, as a former colonial
Yeah, they're still
powers. Yeah.
European countries are still around.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that's a new breed of the 21st century foreign policy agenda on the continent,
Agenda,
would be China and U.S.
And U.S. is being challenged by China
Very much,
across Africa.
very much.
What is the attraction of Chinese to Africans that the U.S. cannot be able to match it?
China does seem to have both economic and political interest on the continent, but they also come in, from our research and from our view, in my worldview, not as an attached strange or strain attached.
Okay.
So more so than what you will see in the U.S. situation. So that's the difference. But they invest sometimes more so without having any kind of attachment, because the U.S. may come in with a different agenda. But it seems like they have already surpassed. U.S. will have to have what I call catch up with Chinese in terms of investment, presence on the continent, in different parts of the continent rather.
They're catching up, or
The U.S. will have to catch up
what need to catch up with the Chinese?
with Chinese,
Yeah. Okay.
in terms of how much
Yeah.
investment Chinese have done on the continent, because they're not in one country, as you can see, and they have emerged in themselves so much so than what we expect of the United States of America in terms of investment.
I think part of the attraction that Chinese are in Africa is, they want energy.
Yeah.
And they make sure that they don't get involved in politics.
Yeah.
The U.S. tend to come to Africa and
They have
put
geopolitical
their
interest. Yeah.
and even the
Yeah.
preconditions
Yeah.
for
And
human
that-
rights and all that stuff.
And that is the differentiator between the Chinese presence and the U.S. presence on the continent as a whole.
Okay. So what is the role of African Union in general pertaining to those two countries? Okay.
The AU, the African Union, as you know, is the umbrella organization of the continent. She has comparable agenda that go along with what's going on with these two superpower, if you want to call that.
Yeah.
So they are also their presence is being felt. They have policies at a regional level or the continental level
Okay.
that will not really contradict what the best interest of Africa is all about. And they should do so, because now we have learned our lessons from the past. What has happened with the first move when colonization period took a lot from the continent. So I'm sure the AU has a strategic investor interest in whatever foreign policy agenda that has been set out about the Chinese or the U.S.
Distinguish this for me. Just like you said, the African Union has an agenda in the overall continent. this regional organization have more specific agenda and goals.
Yes.
Like just you mentioned it before the show,
Yeah.
like ECOWAS, IGAD, and SADC.
Mhm.
And if you go beyond that regional integration, you talk about particular country.
Mhm.
So people are very sensitive about their sovereignty being violated. So they tend to agree on a very superficial aspect of any agenda. Do you think I'm on the right track?
Which
by
is the
saying
reason
that?
why the first AU request by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana in the 50s and others, he was not the only one. There were others, like Tunisian, Morocco, former King Hassan, and all of these people. That is the reason why it did not work, because of what you just said. So now the new approach is a regionalization, if you will. And so the agenda is to advance or enhance economic, political, and social connection between these different nations in the region. For example, the West African Economic Community has done a lot. Right now in West Africa, there's one passport.
Oh, one passport?
Every country in West Africa has one passport. So it doesn't matter whether you're French or English. And that similar thing going on right now in East Africa.
Okay.
You can leave from Rwanda and go to Tanzania or Kenya, tourist-wise, without anybody bothering you. So that's the strategy that has been put in place, where it may not be the USA of Africa. The regionalization process is so that's the agenda to bring the nations closer together for political, economic, and social reasons, which is a good thing.
Oh, it's yeah. It's so
And also stability.
stability.
We must not forget that that the regional organizations also are there to make sure there's a stability between these nations, as in the case of Central Africa with the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and what I call the Great Lakes region. There's also a plan that supports what I'm talking about.
Creating some kind of unified program.
To avoid all that long-term civil war that we've seen happening in that region.
Yeah. In fact, the 70s and 80s was considered as the most disastrous time for Africa in general,
It is.
because a lot of dictators came and go.
Yeah.
But the late 90s and from then on, democracy was introduced.
Yeah.
Not to all.
Not to all.
But to many African countries.
And that's the essence of this book, the second book that I wrote.
Yeah.
That if African leaders, especially those that are struggling, can look at the ones that are doing well and take and copy after them, I think we will be heading for a very good direction in the 21st century. If we can look at it, like we can look at Ghana and see what's working in Ghana, or Botswana, and maybe Tanzania, or the other countries in the southern part of the continent.
Okay.
What make it will not work? And so we have to look at what's working and see if we can use that as an example of somebody, another society. I think that's one of the suggestions that I made in my book.
Okay.
Look at what's working and see. We don't have to always look to the external part of the world, to Europe, to America, to help us solve our problem. It's working here for some countries, and we can do the same thing in other countries.
Oh, the more like indigenous model.
Exactly.
That's from within Africa. I think, there's 10 of them, fast, rapid growing countries. 10 of them are in Africa.
Exactly.
To mention a few: Rwanda, Ghana.
Yeah, and even Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, is one of the fastest growing economy right now, from our research.
Yeah.
And that's not the only one. Rwanda, as you well indicated, it has what we call booming in the economic system. Not only do they have that, they have the largest women in parliament in the world. Can you imagine? They even outpass the U.S. in some of the developed world.
Yeah, they don't have that.
In terms of women leadership.
Yeah, representation.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's true. The more than 50% of the delegates are women in Rwanda, and people need to know that.
And how many of the non-outsiders know about all of this good news? What we hear about is civil war, poverty, farming. I'm not saying that this did not happen or not, but there's something else that we can talk about, which is that is my argument in this book.
You mean the progress?
I'm trying to balance the story.
Okay.
So people know that we are a player in the 21st century as a continent.
Yeah. Especially Rwanda coming out of that genocide, where 20 years ago,
exactly,
over 1 million people was massacred. With ethnic rivalry, and to see a women representation like that.
So then you will see, you look at Rwanda, you say, well, this is what I would call metamorphosis of a country that came from that situation, a genocide of close to 1 million people, even more maybe, to a country that now has become one of the best in terms of economic and political reform.
Yeah.
It's now a turnaround, almost a 180-degree turnaround.
Yeah.
We can be proud of that. We should talk about that.
Oh yeah, very, very true. Oh, very true. In fact, Saudi Arabia, about 2 weeks ago, for the first time in their history, they allowed 5 women to be representative in the parliament. Imagine, 5 out of 600. But these are some of the success stories that we can talk about Africa. But on the other side, as much as we declare success stories, and there's always a loophole. You know,
there's always challenge.
Human rights violations, not having enough representation from the rural or some areas, and the land grabbing issue in terms of development. You allow foreign investors to buy land, and the local population is being disadvantaged because of that. So we can also go ahead. I'm sorry.
And it shouldn't be that way, and that's where again the civil society comes in to make sure that it holds states responsible enough to correct issues that the poor man, the poor woman cannot address, or the little man, or little person cannot address. And that's the power of the civil society. And the countries that they have really been successful, you see a difference. And as I list those countries, from the stages of advanced to committed to hesitant, and of course the ones that are not doing too good. So that's why I had this. If you look in the book, you will see that's how I arranged them, because they are not on the same level. However, there are progress, and that should be discussed sometimes.
Oh, exactly. It comes as a package, just like you said, the civil society will need to address this issue from time to time. And authoritarian states, that's what you said, one of them. We also have some regional powers, and based on that regional powers, we have some foreign policies that is crafted. But recently in South Africa, they had this trade organization. Actually, for the first time throughout the Africa, they are planning to develop this trade relationship among Africans. They call it free trade zone. Again, this free trade zone is beyond politics.
Well, and that's a good news. I'm glad that it's beyond politics. The AU actually, from our research and from what I know, is gradually trying to model itself after the European Union in a lot of ways, and maybe some other multinational organizations. And so I'm glad that that type of meeting took place recently in South Africa, where there can be free movement of people and goods across the continent. And this is something we need, because one good thing happening will affect the rest of the other things. So I'm sure that won't be the last time such a meeting and a decision and policy within that is embedded within the African Union will take this shape and play a useful role in the 21st century, because if it happened for Africa, for one country or one region, it will happen to the rest of the region. I strongly believe that.
Oh yeah, it's just like you say, that it's good to bring indigenous model, African style, and democratize it, that traditional way of doing things. But at the same time, we have the advantage learning from the Europeans and the Americans. We didn't have to go. We didn't have to wait for 200-300 years
Not at all.
to learn. We have the technology.
We have it. And how good, that's the good news, that the world has become so small because technological advancement that you just talked about. However, I just like to add a little bit briefly before you take the next step, is that Africa has become a country, a continent that has been embedded with what I call functionalism. A gradual. The leaders have always laid on gradualism. And so that also has not really helped the continent as a whole, no matter which country you're talking about. They rather do that, they rather reform gradually. And sometimes that doesn't work well in the age and time we are in. So leaders that are having now revelation to move beyond our limit are the ones that are doing very well.
And you always have to protect Africa's interest. The land grabbing issue that I mentioned earlier, it becomes an issue from Benin all the way to East Coast.
The land issue.
A land issue. Like you're leasing your land to Europeans or to the Middle Easterns, and they have that land, and they remove the farmers from the area and not be given enough compensation to the farmer. Then eventually it creates crisis. On one hand, mechanized farming, a bigger farm. is good. On the other hand, at the expense of these farmers.
People who
Yeah.
cannot
Yeah.
fight for themselves.
Yeah.
In such a situation, I think my recommendation would be that the government does something about it, for that particular region, to make sure that the interest of the people who are from there is being preserved.
Preserve
As
again.
much as it's for economic survival,
Yeah.
the other side of the coin must be addressed. And I
Okay.
think government should be sensitive
Yeah.
in addressing the needs of people.
Yeah.
And I think that land issue is a continental problem.
It is.
In
it
my
is,
own
yeah.
country, there's
Yeah.
always talk on that level as well.
In
So
Liberia.
it's in other countries.
Yeah, yeah. They're leasing land for a very cheap, and they realize that 50% of the African population is 20 below.
Yeah,
That is 1/4 that you can utilize down the line,
exactly.
and the land mass, 60% of world consumption is in Africa.
Mhm.
So they will come, and they need Africa.
Mhm.
What we call it Chinese, Saudi Arabia, the U.S., and what have you.
Yeah.
But do we have enough institution to protect ourselves when they come? I think
Yeah.
part of your
And your story is very similar to what happened in Ivory Coast, country next door to my own country,
Okay.
Liberia. The late President Hoford Wande gave a lot of latitude to French. As you can see, it's very developed, especially in the city, Abidjan. So people have to be very careful looking at the future, to not take a lot of this latitude from its original or indigenous. I'm glad you said lease and not sell.
Yeah.
So once you lease, you can always change your mind.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
okay, bro.
from
But
down.
there has to be a way to regulate the policy,
Yeah, okay.
so that what we're talking about can be addressed. That
Yeah.
people who are lower cannot talk for themselves, and their chances to be able to be successful
Successful, yeah.
exist in that area.
Yeah. Leasing also can be very technical. Like a case in Ethiopia, you can lease a land for 99 years. Who's going to live 99
I
years?
can relate to that. When
Yeah.
there's a company in Liberia, I keep going back to Liberia.
No, go ahead, no problem.
Called Firestone. The rubber that you see, the Firestone rubber that you see, that's where they came from. Was a lease that Liberian government did with that company for 99 years. So sometimes
Yeah.
you can get trapped because once the lease is signed, that's a long time to be.
It is,
Yeah, right.
yeah.
So,
And a part of your upcoming book will talk about these issues, all the things that you mentioned, the authoritarianism, the commitment,
yeah.
democracy, So we can't wait to see your book.
Yeah, and myself, I'm very excited about this argument that I'm making. That it's sort of like a balancing of the story, so people know that it is not just one side story. Let's talk about what's working, because there are things that are working, and that's the main argument behind the second book, the area of governance, the area of democracy, and just how much civil society has impacted public policy and formulation, and all of the changes that are happening in the countries that I'm talking about.
Okay.
That's what helped them. And their leaders have that sensitivity to be able to listen and make the good of their promises sometimes. Civil society can make that happen. Somebody had to address it.
I promise you, we're going to invite you again to talk about your new book.
My dear friend, thanks so much.
You said sometimes in June or July.
Yeah. Even probably more, maybe even before that time.
Okay. Once that happens,
Yeah.
we want you here and talk about it a little more. And again, we thank JESSIE MONGRUE. He's a historian, author, currently working his doctorate in education at St. Thomas University. And his previous book is Liberia, America's Footprint in Africa. And his upcoming book is What's Working in Africa. I made a mistake earlier.
What's wrong? And not
What's wrong? Yeah, it's not, there's nothing wrong with
Something's
Africa. Yes. And the role of civic society, democratic reform, and good governance. Again, I thank you, JESSIE.
Thank you so much, my dear friend.
Thank you. On this note, we end today's program of Beyond the Headlines. I'll see you with a different guest next time. Have a nice one. Thank you.
Mama ku, mama sa, mama ku sa, mama ku, mama sa, mama ku sa, mama ku, mama sa, mama ku sa, mama ku, mama sa, mama ku sa. Sumanye. Mosoma, Mosoma. Kuma, 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 kuma. Tanga digo, ombu satanga, ne usama kosa. Alumuna, sisi au, ya sama kosa. Amuna yeye, koma, sama kosa.